Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Marilyn.
What we're going to do is that in the event that you have any questions, place them in the chat mode, and then periodically I'll stop and try and go through all of those so that we can kind of get through the content that we have today. Hope everybody's doing well. Thank you, Marcia, for your comments. My mom is doing quite well. We've been very fortunate. She's been locked down since the middle of February. So their nursing facility is doing a really good job, which is wonderful. I miss seeing her, but she's doing fine so far. Today, what we're going to do, we're really going to zero in on all this confusion everybody has in MLS about the new statuses, as well as the new clear cooperation policy. But more importantly, I get so many questions about.
And Galaxy S8.
Pardon me? Everybody remember to mute when you come in, okay? Because otherwise I'm thinking that you're trying to talk to me on something like that. But what we're going to do is talk about some of the basic MLS questions that I get over and over and over again, and you should really know your MLS rules. So I'm going to point out the ones that are the biggest offenders and the ones that have a lot of fines, and they're automatic fines. They're not going to give you a chance to correct those and that type of thing. We'll look at the HAR 300 form because it changed dramatically once the clear cooperation policy was adopted by the local MLSs. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about today is the seller's disclosure issues for listing agents and buyer's agents. But more importantly, listing agents, not only in what they post in MLS agent remarks, all these different comments that they make, you really are subject to being in serious trouble if you make any comment about the condition of the property. That's what the seller's disclosure is for, not for the listing agent. So we'll go through all of those too as well. Okay, and just a brief update. I've given you these links before for NAR and CDC. Texas Realtors has a guide. It's very similar to abiding by what NAR has, as well as the CDC link, but it's available for you on the Texas Realtor site as well. The other thing they have is a new COVID-19 rental viewing access for leases. They had one for purchases that they posted over a month ago, and now they have one for leases for you to do in the event that the landlord has some certain criteria that they want people to follow that come in. Here's what I am going to tell you that we have found out just recently in the last month is that there are lenders that have very solid buyers, extremely qualified, high credit scores, lots of assets and those type of things. And those lenders have actually waived an appraisal. And so again, we have it on the buyer-tenant agreement. We added that remote viewing as well as the appraisal, a waiver, or not doing an appraisal in person, that type of thing. So pay attention to this very clearly. Try and get this established up front. You have to understand that there is no way an agent would ever recommend that a buyer, not even a cash buyer, would not get an appraisal done to verify value. They can make that decision, but we're never going to say it's okay not to have an appraisal. Do you see what I'm saying? I just don't want y'all to get caught up in them saying that it was your idea that they didn't need an appraisal and it was cash. That is very, very serious. But again, the lenders are changing all sorts of different situations because of this COVID-19. I think some of them were trying to expedite the process because some appraisers were not picking up the orders. They didn't want to go in and do, you know what I'm saying? There's just certain things that the market is responding to on those type of things. So again, just be real careful about making sure that you never say that it's okay not to have an appraisal on the property. We give price opinions. That's what our CMA is, but we don't give value. And again, only an appraiser is able to do that based on their credentials and their criteria. Okay. Now we're going to get to some MLS rules. I have another screen that I'll pull up after we get through this. But the first one is, when must you enter your listing into MLS? Well, some people read paragraph 6 in the listing agreement and they see this number 5 and they think it's 5 days. How many days is it? You all better say 3 days of the beginning date of the listing. Okay.
3.
The other problem that we have is a lot of agents don't know when the listing begins. Well, it's in paragraph 4. It's called term. The beginning date is exactly what I'm going to reference every time I say listing beginning date. We have a lot of agents who think when the seller signed the listing agreement is when they have a listing. But if you look at the paragraph B in paragraph 4, term, it clearly says that if the seller receives an offer prior to that beginning date, this listing automatically terminates and the brokers don't get anything. So again, be very careful about understanding this listing agreement and what triggers those dates. But our MLS rules are different than the association listing agreement that we use. That's a statewide form. There are lots of MLSs that say it's within 5 days, but your MLS does not. So we would only put a listing in within the 5 days, the beginning day. If you don't, what must you do? If you're not ready to put your listing into MLS within 3 days of the beginning listing date, what are you going to do? Well, in the listing agreement, paragraph 6A1B is marked. You will do one of the following. You're either going to place an MLS.
Stop, I'm doing something. Don't play with me right now.
Okay. Place it in MLS as coming soon, and that has to be within the 3 days of the beginning date. You can do that. Remember that if you put in a sign or you advertise it, you have to put it in MLS within 1 business day of advertising it. Coming soon is a status that MLS has defined as only 14 days for you. So after that 14 days has passed, it will go to a withdrawn status. Or you will provide the HAR 300 completed by the seller, signed by your team leader manager, and then you'll send to HAR MLS. You cannot advertise anything until it goes into MLS. Everybody understand that? And I think that's the problem. Agents typically have not followed these rules all along. It's always been that case. But with the clear cooperation policy, they've tightened it up tremendously for you. You don't get to advertise until it is made available to cooperation with other brokers and their clients. HAR 300 just says, I'm not going to enter it ever, if it's going to be a non-MLS listing, or if you're going to delay the time for you to be making it active in MLS on something like that. Again, no property signs, no showings, nothing. You don't get to do those things that you normally do because it's not active in MLS. Coming soon, you can't show the property. It doesn't mean hurry up and come here before everybody else gets an opportunity to see this listing. So again, you have to be real clear about that. That HAR 300 form, let me give you an example that agents are really struggling with. They go out on an appointment and the seller says, after you did your staging, advisory, and all of this, it's going to take me about 3 weeks to get this property in place. Well, the listing agent says, I'm going to have the listing begin now because you're going to need my advice and opinions. And you personally want to be protected. I've had too many agents go out, stage the property, do all this, and they don't have a listing agreement. And then the seller comes up and said, oh, I've already sold it. And it was prior to the beginning date. So again, protect yourself. Get that listing that it's going to commence, and so that you can be involved in it, but just be cautious and let the sellers know. It's right there in black and white in our listing agreement, as well as the HAR 300. They don't get to advertise it. It's for specific purposes. But when a seller says, it's going to take me, Marilyn, it's going to take me 20 days to get this thing ready, you're going to say, okay. So in the beginning, prior to 14 days of when you think the seller will be ready, you have the HAR done, but you didn't put it in MLS as coming soon because you don't want to trigger a withdrawn status, okay, because you have 20 days. So just remember, if you do the HAR 300, that doesn't mean you get to advertise it. The only way you are ever going to be able to place it in the status of coming soon is that the other brokers can queue on that coming soon status. Doesn't mean you'll have any showings or anything, but it just means that you're cooperating. It's just that you're not going to be ready for showings until that status becomes active. So again, you've got to pay attention to the details here. We have so many agents that are so confused by this, but really you are never allowed to advertise your listing until when? Until it became active in MLS. As an MLS participant, that's what you agree to. If the listing will always be a non-MLS listing, this is what we have an option, and HAR has really worked hard in their MLS to try and get around this clear cooperation policy with difficulties for agents abiding by certain things. But if your listing is going to be a non-MLS listing, that means that paragraph 682 is marked. You can never publicly advertise it. It's only in the event that you have this brokerage's clients will be the only ones that will know about it. You are not able to advertise outside of your brokerage. So be real careful about that. There's no signs in the yards, no advertising, no promoting to any private email list. It's only for this brokerage. It's a private listing within this brokerage only. You don't get to let your agents know that work in that area outside of your brokerage. It's only for the broker and their clients. When do you report pending status? Within 3 days of the signed contract. We have lots of agents who fail to do that, and the buyer's agent and the buyers get all bent out of shape because it's still showing active when it should have been marked that it's 3 days of the signed contract. It doesn't talk about business days. What are the statuses that you can use? Well, pending, show for backup. The seller in the contract clearly states that I get to accept and continue marketing this property until we close on it. In other words, the seller always has the opportunity to have a backup contract on the property. Option pending is what you will put in it if the buyer has the termination option per the contract, or P, which is the pending status. And so just make sure that you are updating those statuses. That's when other agents really complain. They get upset that you haven't provided the proper status in the right time. The buyer sees it, that it's still active, and they don't like that, you know, even though it's in the contract that the seller can certainly have backup contracts. When do you have to report sold status? Well, within 3 days of the actual closing and funding date. So the 3 is a kind of a key time limit. Once you enter it into MLS, it's 3 days from the beginning listing date, it's 3 days if any of the statuses ever change, and it's 3 days to report any sold information in MLS. So again, 3 seems to be a magic number here on something like that. Let me see about the questions that we have. Let me see what.
There's only one question, Marilyn, because I know the chat is super long with everybody putting their names. Do you want me to read you the question? There's only one.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So what is the purpose of coming soon or the advantages? It may be already been answered, but sorry.
Okay, no problem. The advantage is, you know how I remember when NAR came out with the coming soon. In other words, it's to get what? An excitement around having the property that's going to be available active soon. And so it was misused always by agents. And that's one of the problems that we have on some of the clear cooperation is people didn't follow it properly to begin with. But coming soon now in MLS, what your MLS did was something very unique. It's not done in the other MLSs per se, is they created a separate status. And so what does that mean? You've got a coming soon sign out in the yard. Within 1 business day, you have to have it in MLS. And it either is going to be active or coming soon. Those are the only ways that it'll work if you have any signage out or any other advertising going on. And what happens is the other participants in MLS can go in. Say I have a buyer and a buyer says, Marilyn, I want a house in this area. I can now queue on coming soon to see if there will be an upcoming listing that will be active based on the criteria. A lot of the requirements are not there for you to have to do certain things and pictures and other things under coming soon status. So again, it's just a way for other participants to know you have a listing agreement. It's going to be coming soon in MLS, and it's just a good way for the participants to know that it's coming soon, that there might be something. So make sure you don't ignore that status when you're looking for your buyers as well. Any other questions?
Yes, 2 more.
Okay.
Can we leave a sold sign in the yard after closing if house is vacant and being remodeled?
No, we have to take down all, after something has closed and funded, we have to remove all advertising as well as all signage in the yard. So just remember that's part of that process of closing it, the transaction out. You cannot leave it there. Do we have that happen a lot? Oh yeah, we have it happen a lot. Agents leave their sign up forever. They're thinking they're going to get a buyer, right? But the problem too with this HAR and the MLS rules, you can never ever give a false representation to the public. And if you had a sign out that said sold, there's no reason for it to be sold. You can't provide that to any consumer because it's already sold. So again, now you need to get all of those documents out of any advertising that you might have, as well as all your signage down from the property. Any other questions?
Yes, there's 1 more. Do cumulative days on the market count the 14 days of coming soon?
No. In fact, I don't know if any of you have been paying attention, but days on market was suspended during this COVID-19. And there has been discussion, not only from this local MLS, but a lot of MLSs throughout the country that do days on market. And there are agents in your MLS that would like to see that days on market not be there at all. There's both sides on all of this. They feel it hurts the seller, and buyers feel that it's better for the buyer to know. It helps their negotiation with them. And so there's a different school. So we have no idea how it's going to affect in the future, but right now, coming soon does not affect your days on market at all. Days on market begin when you start active in MLS. Any other questions?
No, not for the moment.
Okay. All right, we'll go to the next one. Okay, for the non-MLS, we talked about this, but everybody has to be clear. This private brokerage listing is only for the broker's client. So you cannot, again, you can't advertise, you can't put a sign in the yard. And you know, it's going to be very limited application. There are times when there's a seller who needs to have privacy for that. And this is one of the mechanisms that we're able to do. When do you update the estimated closing date? This happens all the time. Listing agents, you better do it before that passes. There's a penalty involved if you let the closing date pass in MLS. So before it passes, go out there and extend the closing date. And some listing agents say, well, I don't know because the seller won't sign an amendment to extend closing. Well, I'm going to tell you, you're going to get with your seller and you're going to determine a date that it will close in the future. Just don't let it pass. That is a real difficult situation for agents to be involved in. The other thing we have problems with are how many photos you must have in MLS. Okay, for residential improved properties, including leases, you have to have 6. They each have to be unique. Can't have the same photo in each one of them. They have to be unique. But what's really interesting is in your MLS rules, it says that one of them must be a true depiction of the property as it is right now. We have, and in leases in particular, I'm going to just comment on, we have landlords who had, you know, this property leased for quite a few years, and they really like the pictures from several years ago. And they're going to try and get you to use those photos, right? You have a problem using any photos that are not your own and that you've paid for. There's copyright protections. You don't get to use anybody's photo until you get all the copyright releases, not only from the photographer, but from anyone who may have acquired the photos and paid for them. But more importantly, it references in your MLS rules that one of the pictures must be truly as the property is. So it may have looked better when it was clean and fresh paint, but you cannot depict the property. You have to depict it as it is. It truly is. No confusion on that. For lots and acreage, you have to have how many photos? At least one photo, okay? And when must they be added? They have to be added within 10 days of the list date. Okay, that's the beginning date of your listing. So you can have something and then upload them, but you are the time frame is within 10 days of the list date. Now, is new construction property subject to this rule? Yes, they are. And this is the problem that we have. A lot of agents represent builders, and in various stages. You know, it could be just the land purchase, and they have a rendition of the property to be built and those type of things. But there is a special form you can use in MLS, and I'll go through it when I pull up the top MLS rules to remember. And it would allow you to provide 3 photos instead of the required, how many? 6. 6 is the minimum photos that you can have. And again, there's some other requirements that for new construction, or if you're representing a builder that's doing multiple properties, there are several forms that you can use to get that type of compliance with MLS rules regarding photos and other things. Again, the most important part for you to remember is that for all the property classes, even new construction, you have to include one photo of the property as it is, a true depiction of the property. And that's so important to do that. Do I have any questions?
Let me see. Yes. What should we do when we see listings without photos or with only one photo, etc., beyond the 10 days of the listing?
You mean you want to be the one that notifies MLS that this other agent has violated an MLS rule? Is that what the question is?
It looks like that's
Yeah.
it.
Well, hopefully your buyer's not interested in the property, because you don't want to make an enemy before your buyer has submitted the offer on it and stuff like that. You know, I'm just going to tell you what our experience has been. No one knows the MLS rules except a few agents. And in Houston, it's amazing. There will be those agents, but they are so busy all day long. They're just checking and making sure how many brokers and agents are violating the rules. Again, it feels like that because, again, the only people who really know the MLS rules are the agents and the brokers. And they just hop to it and want to tattle on you as many times as possible so that you can get into trouble or violation. I get asked that all the time. The buyers are very upset because they didn't get their offer accepted or whatever, those type of things. So personally, I'd like y'all to all concentrate. I know we need to take the high road here. I'd like you to really concentrate on you abiding by your MLS rules when you're a listing agent. And if your buyer is upset about something, they can contact MLS if they want to complain about something. But we have so many good things to be focusing on that it's real difficult for us to be the police for the MLS. But that's how it's done. Everybody turns everybody else in. Any other questions?
Yes. What about properties that are vacated after pictures are taken? I noted in the MLS that it's vacant as the specific date they moved out. Will that suffice?
You have to have at least one picture that is presenting the property as it is. It doesn't say an interior picture on something like that. But I know that there's massive discussion. There has always been about the status of vacant in MLS. Some sellers don't want that posted because they feel it's a security risk on their property. But again, on the seller's disclosure, it clearly states, are you occupying the property? And when the buyers go, they're going to look at it in its true form that they're willing to accept, not with all the things in it. So again, my problem is just don't use photos that came from before. These are your actual photos. And if some status changed during the course of it, I am going to tell you the one thing I would be real particular about, and we've had lawsuits on this. You paid somebody to take these wonderful professional photos, and they did a great job. Somewhere during your listing time, the seller decided, I'm taking those chandeliers with me. I want it excluded. Okay. They take them down. Chandeliers are real property. They're attached to the property. You would have to pull every photograph of anything in the property that is real that the sellers have now removed. Yeah, you cannot post a photo showing a bunch of chandeliers that have now been removed from the property. So be very, very careful about it. That's really what they're trying to get at, mainly because we've had so many lawsuits where sellers have done that. And buyers go back and look at the pictures and said, they took that ceiling fan down. And yet when they saw the property, the ceiling fan was down. The problem was the listing agent failed to remove those photos or have them replaced. So be very careful about that. Any more? I see your lips moving.
Sorry.
That's okay.
There's one more. With days on market suspended, does this hold true right now?
Yeah, it did at the, they did that back in March. And so I don't know if they've lifted it or not, or if there's going to be a time frame on it. I do know there's lots of discussion going on, and you will see it on the blog sites where they're all the agents are weighing in. Listing agents don't like it at all because it hurts the seller's position sometimes, and buyer's agents love it because it helps what? The buyer's power of positioning, saying, oh, it's been on the market for 360 days. They're going to jump at my offer type of thing. So as you get notifications every day from MLS when the rules change and stuff like that, so make sure that y'all reference them and read them. Any more?
Okay. And a last one regarding the chandelier. Is this the case even if it's excluded in as an MLS listing?
If it's excluded in your listing and the photograph is there, I think I would make notation in the agent remarks to be very careful about that, to make sure that they know there. Please see the uploaded exclusion list. Boy, as a listing agent, they've really been hurt on something like this because they failed to provide a true picture of the property. What most of the agents have done is there's a banner on that photograph, say at the dining room, and that chandelier is going to be excluded, right? In the notation on the banner under the photo, it says chandelier is excluded from sale of property, whatever it is, but they put the real true depiction of whatever is in that photograph and stuff like that. So again, you don't want to have a picture that's not going to be how the buyer's going to receive the property, that type of thing. Notation should be made on something like that. Any other?
What about coming soon on Instagram, Facebook, and email blast?
And what is it? What are they asking about? Coming soon means what? That the property is coming soon. You're not going to have any showings during coming soon. It has to be in MLS within 1 business day as coming soon or active. So again, if you do that, you can't do it publicly. That coming soon status is what? Only for the participants. So you probably would be very mindful not to include anyone who's not an MLS participant when you discuss your coming soon. If you put a sign out in the yard, that it has to be in MLS as coming soon within 1 business day. Okay.
That's it. No more
Okay.
questions.
So now we're going to do a little evaluation. So everybody, make sure you answer all of these perfectly. Can you withdraw a listing to avoid reporting sales price and closing information? Yes or no? The answer is no, never. And you're going to say, oh, but the buyer and seller agreed to it. I don't really care. It's not about them, ever. MLS rules are what you and your broker must abide by. They don't get to control this element.
Marilyn, may I add to that?
Uh-huh.
So here's what it looks like. If you do that, I don't know about how long it takes, but I'm going to get a notice saying that you've been fined $100. This happens also, this next part is just crazy, and I know a lot of you are going to be like, that's not fair. But if you lose the listing during the time period, so you have a 6-month listing, and on month number 2, you and the sellers are just not getting along. They go off and they decide they're going to FSBO it, and they sell it. You will still get a letter from MLS saying that you need to give them the price that the property sold for. Sounds insane, because these people may not even like you, you may not like them, but you are still obligated, according to the original agreement that you had with HAR, that you are going to provide them that information. And so I've gotten into it before and taken it to Bob Hill, saying, and he's the head of HAR, that just doesn't seem very fair, but they're so adamant about price reporting, so strict about it. And we see agents doing this, about withdrawing to avoid this happening. Sometimes your seller wants that done. You can't do it, and they will come after you, I promise you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an automatic matching system. They download that information, they cross-verify with MLS data, and so that's how they're able to do all of that. But I get it a lot, especially in certain areas of the Houston market, where buyers and sellers don't want the tax person to know what they sold the property for, what they bought it for, and so they suck in the agents, and we had one that went on so protracted, and the broker had to stand firm with the seller and the buyer and both of their attorneys and saying, you don't get to tell me that I'm not going to comply with MLS rules. That's not within your ability. Plus, they signed the listing agreement and they agreed to abide by all of that anyway. So again, it's one of those things that comes up so often, and like Michael will get all of the notices, make no mistake. When must you enter your listing? When must the listing be entered into MLS? Within 3 days of the beginning date of the listing agreement. Not when the sellers sign it, but when in paragraph 4, the term. How many photos are required for a single family property? 6, right? And one of them has to be a true depiction of the property. How many photos are required for lots or acreage?
1.
There you go. Thank you for answering that. Yes, 1. So again, just make sure. And how many photos must be a true photo of the property as it is?
1.
That's right. When must the photos be added in MLS?
Within 3 days.
Within 10 days.
Within 10 days
10
of
days.
the beginning listing date, correct. When are you required to update a pending or sold status? Within 3 days of the contract being signed. Okay, or an amendment, or it being sold. 3 days is that real key element you just have to focus on. Here's another one that we get a lot of. Can the listing agent place themselves in the MLS as the selling agent? Yes or no?
No.
No, never. There is a fine for that, and it is automatic. A lot of agents say, I'm the selling agent, when they're really the listing agent. The selling agent is who? The buyer's agent. There you go. So they get confused. Now I am going to tell you it would be a non-MLS agent is what you'll use as the filter on something like that. If it's if you are the only agent in the transaction, the buyer was a customer. On the back end of MLS, it always asks you, did you represent the buyer, whatever, and then you mark that. But it has to be when you post that information, making sure that the listing agent is never going to be the selling agent. Can you list a manufactured home without the sale of the land? Yes or no?
Yes.
No.
Absolutely not. We only sell real estate, everybody. And the
Yeah, that's
manufacturer.
a car title, isn't it, kind of?
Well, it is very similar. It does have a title to it. The problem is everything has to be permanently attached for it to be considered real property. So we can only list a manufactured home if it's permanently attached to the land. In the physical property description, public as well, the public remarks. Can you place details about financing, emails, or cell numbers to contact someone?
Ever.
No.
Never. You can never do that. It's real important that you make sure that you follow these rules. Now, what I'm going to do out here is I am going to where is it? We're going to actually pull up the top MLS rules. I got all of this from reading all of your MLS rules and regulations, but these are the top ones that you should remember, and we've talked about these. Insufficient number of photos, the physical property description for the public, your listing agreement. Did you know that you have to have a signed listing agreement to put it in MLS? Oh my word, I can't believe that. Not only does it need to be signed, it needs to be fully executed by all parties. And the reason for that is these are bilateral agreements. You can't have a listing agreement if you just sign it, and you can't have a listing agreement if the sellers just sign it. Both parties must sign it. These are bilateral agreements that we would have to have. Would you have to have a signed amendment to reduce the list price in MLS? Yes, that's what they're saying. You don't have anything going on unless you have it signed by the party that you represent. We don't put any status in or anything. They talk about the property class. The biggest thing here is, can you have a property listed for sale and listed for lease at the same time? Yes, that's the only time the same property can be in multiple property classes.
Marilyn, can I ask a quick question about the previous one? This is Genevieve. There's sometimes where a client says, I want you to reduce my price right now, and I get them to put it in an email or in writing. Are we allowed to do that before they sign the amendment if they can't get the amendment or that paperwork in time, as long as they send us documentation in writing?
I think so, and especially if it's coming from a source that they have previously communicated to you, you would have to keep all of that and then reduce it in the form of a formal amendment at some point. But yes, I would think so. These are our private agreements, and we, as long as your MLS agreement had an email address for your sellers and they were using that one to communicate to you, I think that would be sufficient until you got a formal amendment on something like that. The problem that we have a lot of time is sellers, well, I didn't say that. Somebody else got in there. You know what I'm saying? So just remember to reduce it to our actual amendment as soon as possible. Private remarks. Here is where agents get into trouble, and I'm going to talk about this in just a minute. They put communication in agent remarks regarding various things, and MLS says that you can't enter remarks related to commission, bonuses, cooperation, contingent upon certain things, all these different things. So the other thing is you can't mention a specific title company in the MLS as well. You could always say, buyer's agents, please contact listing agent prior to completing an offer, and then you would be at that point in time being able to do that. But again, there's just in private remarks, that's only going to go to the other participants. The other thing I'm going to tell you is interesting. I didn't highlight it, but the incorrect tax ID and those type of things, they're real particular about making sure that you verify the information that's there. But one of the things that's kind of interesting that we're involved in right now in another market center is the listing agent asked the seller, do you have your prior appraisal showing square footage, right? Because square footage is this hot button, and buyers and buyer's agents, they all get bent out of shape, even though the contract's not about square footage. What happens is in your MLS rules, they ask you for the best results is to auto-populate from Realist. And so when you do that and you follow it and your sellers don't have any other documentation that says something differently, you actually are abiding by MLS rules on something like that. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up because if you know it's not true, then you know you have to make those notation and agent remarks and independently verify everything on something like that. These are all very important to you, but these are the ones we kind of get the most issues regarding on something like that. And again, that estimated close date, make sure that you extend that as you're getting close. I'm going to give you an example. We had a seller who would not come to close. And so the close date was coming up, and the listing agent needed guidance on this, and the attorney said, just extend it in the future, you know, on something like that. As we get more into this, we'll have more information, that type of thing. And so the listing agent kept extending it. Well, 2 years later, the seller finally was forced to sell that property to the buyer and give them a deed to the property. So the agent was just continually doing that. And they were guided by the attorney that says, hey, just keep doing it. Don't let that close date pass on something like that. So it's real important to make sure that we take care of that as well. There are no exceptions, and this closed data that he was talking about is one of the things that they do cross all the deeds that are filed and recorded so that they catch an agent that didn't provide any closed information. I've talked about the wrong selling agent and false or misleading information. Agents are subject to, if you know something is not true or it is misleading, the agents are subject to those violations. So again, we never want any false or inaccurate information submitted, especially if you know that it's not accurate information. Okay, go back to my other screen here. I want to show you the HAR 300 form. I showed it to you last month, but again, when we talked about it, HAR changed it to include the rules regarding the clear cooperation policy. And so it goes through what public marketing is. And again, you can't publicly market a property unless it's active in MLS. Coming soon status is just that. It's just a status that no one will receive except the participants. But they placed all of the information that the seller affirms that if they even market the property and it's a non-MLS listing, that the broker would be required to place it in MLS within 1 business day. So again, all of this is all in bold, what the when you opt out of MLS. And then again, they have temporarily, if 6A1B was marked, then it would be temporarily until a certain a date occurs, or it's going to be permanently. It's never going to be placed in MLS. And then everybody has to sign it. Your broker has to sign it off, manager, the person in charge, and then you as the listing agent will submit it to HAR to comply with the rules on that type of thing. Okay. Any other questions?
Let me see. I'll review the chat. Can you upload title information in a document for agent view only?
You mean about a choosing of a title company? No, it can't be anywhere in MLS. Preferred
Then
title company.
what do we do about the tax ID number if the seller has had it removed from appraisal district for security concerns for their job?
Well, if there's not a tax ID, then you place that there's not a tax ID. That's one of the notations in your MLS.
Okay, and that's it.
Okay, so now we're going to get to a real interesting part of your task as a listing agent, and it reflects on the buyer's agent. And here's what I'm going to tell you. who is the only party, or who are the only parties that get to talk about the condition of the property? It's the sellers only. And my concern is just in MLS, you know how we talked about agent remarks, that's where you can put certain things. I see in agent remarks, home is in immaculate condition, pristine, been totally updated. You know what I'm saying? All these things about the condition of the property. And you are going to be subject to, if you said that it's in mint condition means different things for different peoples. And the anatomy of a lawsuit that Bo Blackburn just had a month ago, he was referencing how listing agents kind of drop their guard a little bit because they're very familiar with the property. They answer a lot of questions of buyer's agents, and that's not how it should be. If it's not in writing on the seller's disclosure, the listing agent's not going to make a comment about it. And that's a big concern, is that you tend to speak for the seller regarding the condition of the property. You're always going to verify either it's in writing or the sellers are going to respond to those questions. So don't jump the gun and do that. But the seller's disclosure should be completed. That is your biggest task as a listing agent. Every question answered by the sellers, those that require provide explanation, and then any documents that would be attached to the seller's disclosure. We have them for the on-site sewer and septic. We have them for the lead-based paint addendum. We have it for the information regarding special flood hazard areas. We could have it for previous inspection reports. So there's a lot of documents. But if you use Seller Shield, they've incorporated that if your seller said yes to one of these addenda that we have on forms, it'll bring that form in and allow them to complete it and sign it. It eliminates a lot of headaches for you, because your task is really to make sure that it's completed. And again, you're not going to say to a seller, oh, you need to mark that unknown since you don't know that. That's not ever going to be something that you want to do. That is not, the law requires the sellers to complete the disclosure, not the listing agent to do that. So again, just be very careful that you don't state any condition of the property, because you could be subject to it rather than the sellers. So you just really want to be careful. And again, the notations you make in MLS sometimes frighten me, because you make a condition about a mint condition, everything's been updated, when it's only got a couple of things that have been updated. So again, be more guarded about what you place in MLS regarding the remarks about the condition of the property or the updates on it. Listing agents never to add anything to a seller's disclosure, even if the sellers ask you to. I got a call last week, and the agent called and she said the seller said just go ahead and make that change on the disclosure. And the agent knew that they shouldn't do it, but they were just emphatic they wanted them to make it. I don't care how emphatic they are. Your listing agreement clearly states that they are required to complete those disclosures, and at any point in time that they have an update regarding the material condition of the property, like a previous inspection report or anything, they are required per our listing agreement to update all of those. And it's not your job to do it. They need to do that. So be real firm on that. Can a listing agent review for the form to be completed? Yes, that's your job for the most part. If you see something that's blank, you're not going to tell them what to fill in the blank. You're just going to say, you missed this box, you need to complete that. Now, I am going to tell you there's two schools of thoughts. One of them says if you know something is not correct, you're going to say something. Well, for example, the last question in Section A, it's about the property being in a groundwater conservation district or a subsidence district. On any given day, I could pull up every one of your listing sellers' disclosures, and your sellers are in a subsidence district. Your whole area is in a district, and yet they say no. And I don't know about you, but if I were the listing agent, I would add the TCEQ map that we've given you. It's a map of all the districts in Texas, their names and that type of thing, and you give that that to the seller, make that a part of the listing agreement. The sellers are going to need to complete the disclosure truthfully. And it's interesting, on the stand under deposition, the attorney representing the buyers who are suing, they asked the listing agent, did you know that this wasn't correct? And the listing agent said, yes. And they said, you did not say something to your client? And so I always look at it, how is it going to entrap you to be in trouble because of something the sellers failed to mark or something was incomplete? We've had more lawsuits over a box not being marked, and we had it several times, and it was previous fires and those type of things. So again, it's important for you to know if you know something. For instance, if they have a mandatory property owners association, right? You know that because it's in your listing agreement that you are going to have that situation, and yet on the section they just say no, they don't, and you know it to be true or false, you are going to say something. You don't want them to provide something that's going to come back on you on something like that. So again, be mindful of those types of situations. Now for buyer's agents, here's the problem that you get into. If you are a buyer's agent, you're not in charge of the listing, you haven't advised the seller, and you're not going to advise the seller. Here's a couple of situations that we get into all the time. You have to review the seller's disclosure with the buyer, and you're looking at it for what? If there's something that's not completed. You don't know if it's accurate or not, but if it's not completed, and your buyer, and you after you review them, if the buyer wants this information completed, then you can ask the listing agent to get the sellers to complete it. So it's always at the buyer's agent's requirements to go through the form with the buyer if there's something that's not been answered, or if the buyer wants the explanation that wasn't completed in one of the sections after it was marked by the seller. We get this a lot with termite treatment or damage to the property and those type of things, and they mark yes, and then the section behind it doesn't have the explanation. See, in Seller's Shield, the moment your sellers mark yes and an explanation is required, they won't let them complete this until they do that. So again, as a buyer's agent, you are tasked with going through this form, not determining if everything is correct, but that it was completed, that your buyer's got a completed disclosure. If the seller refuses and you get the response from your buyers in writing that they understand that the sellers will not update the seller's disclosure or provide it, and then let the buyers determine if they want to go forward with an offer on something like this. It's really in their hands. You can't force the seller to do the right thing. All you get to do is request, and then if the sellers fail to respond, you wouldn't believe how many RE/MAX agents, when our buyer's agents go through something and find something is missing, the listing agent says, you're not going to get the seller to answer that or complete it. You just either have to accept it or that's it, or just go away. So again, you know, there's only so much that you have, but as a buyer's agent, you just want to be purposeful about making sure that you have reviewed it for completeness with the buyers, and then the buyers get to make a decision. The other thing I'm going to tell you is that the law requires the seller to provide the disclosure. The law doesn't say the buyers must sign it. Now, I'm just going to talk to you from a brokerage standpoint. We always want the buyers to have a completed form so that they can acknowledge it in writing and sign and date it. The problem is that sometimes we have situations where, just like I said, the RE/MAX agent said, the seller's not going to complete it. We're not going to, it's what it is, this kind of thing. And so your buyer doesn't have to sign it and date it and give it back. The buyer has received it. You can prove that. It's not like they don't know about it or they don't know that it's incomplete, but there's nothing that would force that buyer to sign it. So you can put that in the message section. Here's the email. The buyer said they've gotten it, but they're not going to sign it because it's not complete. That's great. That's a real good way for you to show that you reviewed it with the buyers and then the buyers made the decision not to do that. The last thing is, as a buyer's agent, I need you to understand something. It says, can a buyer terminate a contract if they find out the seller did not disclose something accurately? Okay. The contract doesn't say that the buyer gets to terminate the contract. 7B2 gives a provision if the seller failed to provide it prior to offer. It does give a provision that once the buyer does receive it, or if they never receive it, they have a provision to terminate. The problem is we've had lots of buyers who haven't deposited the earnest money or gotten the option fee receipted, and they may have already inspected the property and they found out. Case in point, we had one where the seller said that I think the HVAC and the water heater were new and they were 20 years old. And so, the inspector uncovered that and the buyer said, I'm not paying that option fee. And they wanted to terminate based upon the seller not having told the truth. That would be a civil dispute between the buyer and the seller. Per our contract, it's never attached to the contract, but there is a provision that says you complied with the law. And if they don't give it to the buyer prior to offer, the other option, of course, is that the buyer could receive it within so many days and then have the ability to terminate. The other option is that they're exempt. Case in point, most agents say, well, the seller never lived in the property. That is not an exemption under the Texas Property Code 5.008. So as a listing agent, be very, very careful that you allow a seller not to comply with the law. The seller is looking to you to know, and we know the law. It's right there on the top of the seller's disclosure, the Texas Property Code provision on that type of thing. And so, again, be very careful about making sure that as a listing agent that you've assisted your seller in complying with the law. And when forms change, it's usually due because some legislation has passed and the governor signed it into law. Now our seller's disclosures would have to change on something like that. But again, I have lots of concerns for listing agents who make responses to a buyer's agent when they ask about the condition of the property and it's not on the seller's disclosure. So be very careful not to put yourself in the position of making the disclosure for the sellers. You could be in trouble on something like that. And as buyer's agent, it is your duty to go through and make sure that the disclosure is completed. And I'll tell you that TCEQ map, a lot more buyer's agents I see where buyer's agents have placed in the map on their buyer tenant agreement because they wanted to know that they had reviewed all of those districts that impact your whole area that you have here. Any questions?
Yes, I'm just gonna read them. Okay, here it is. Isn't Seller's Shield only available for owner-occupied properties, or has that changed?
Well, they allow, even if a seller has moved out and the property is vacant, they still own the property. I think they still allow that. Where they will not allow, you can always get them to use the free wizard. It's the contract for legal assistance that is on a select area. They won't do it for investors or flippers or those types of things. So, but you have a free wizard and the sellers can always complete it based on the free wizard. That's not tied to the legal contract that you'll have.
Okay, thank you. The next one, is it okay to attach a sheet with list of updates along with the dates they were done?
And where are you talking about to the seller's disclosure?
I don't know. That's a whole. Yolanda, do you want to clarify?
Yes, can you attach the document to the MLS?
As long as the sellers have signed it and it comes from them and not from you, yeah, you can do something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The next one, builders, where do we find the TCEQ map?
It's on the TCEQ website.
Okay. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. Yeah, the TCEQ, they have a map for all of that. That they also have the information regarding any districts in Texas. It could be a water district and those other types of things. They control all of that for the state of Texas. But again, there should be lots of resources. I've given them to you over the years. I'll give Gabby the updated TCEQ map, and she can send it out, and then she can upload that as well into the Market Center internet for you. But again, MLS rules you are bound to them, and to know them is the most important part of abiding by them and not letting somebody trick you into not doing them. I am going to talk a little bit about next month. We are doing a lot of leases, and we're going to be doing a lot of leases in your area. The HUD has provided some guidelines based upon the information regarding landlords and tenants and assistance animals. And we are going, they've written a letter explaining it a little bit more in detail. When it first came out, it was real broad, and people were downloading things from the internet and getting, able to say this animal is an assistance animal and those type of things. And my concern for you as agents, both as a buyer's agent and a listing agent, is you will be pulled into anything that the landlord doesn't understand their obligations. And so next month we're going to go through some of these guidelines that HUD have provided and updated. Texas Realtors is really good because all of the forms that we use from Texas Realtors abides by fair housing and all of the requirements. But we have a lot of landlords who look to the lease listing agent to tell them how to be a landlord and tell them to comply with all the fair housing that. And our obligations are very, very exact. We are not allowed to ever discriminate against any of the classes. So we have to make sure that our clients don't do that as well. And so again, next month, that's what we're going to do. We're going to review the HUD guidelines. We're going to talk about the big points that you keep doing. And I love the agents, they call me and they say, oh, I just want to know this for my own purpose. If you respond to anything that's outside of your realm, and when you are a lease listing agent, your function is to promote the property, market it, and get and procure a ready, willing, and able tenant. It is not to teach them how to be a landlord. It is not to quote them on the rules. While you have to know certain areas because you cannot allow parties to discriminate and be a participant in it, you have to be very, very careful about it. And half the time I get responses from people who don't know the lease. They've never read the lease. They don't know that it's already in the lease, and they're asking all these questions. You shouldn't be representing a tenant or a seller if you do not at least know what those provisions are. Those are our association forms, and we are able to review those and explain those to, but not legally interpret them, obviously. So next month's going to be very important to be able to kind of focus on that, because I'm seeing way too many things done poorly on the part of leasing, not only from the listing agent side, but also from the tenant side. Any questions?
No.
Yeah, when is that? When is that going to be, Miss Marilyn?
Next month? It's
Do you have
it's the last Monday of the month.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, I am going to tell you, I'm hoping I can be there in person, but we'll just see what happens. If not, we'll be meeting again by Zooming.
Awesome. Marilyn, can I share my screen so that I can, well, is it done? Are you done?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, awesome. Guys, before you leave, I'm gonna share the QR code for you to scan so that you can get the sign out. Okay. And there you go. Please scan the QR code so that you get to sign out. And for all of you guys that put your names into the chat, I already added you. So if you want to give it a try and scan sign out, it's going to let you do it.
All right, good people. Have a great day. I miss all of you. Take care.
We
Bye-bye.
miss you too. Hopefully we see each other in
Thank
person.
Hopefully really soon.
Thank you,
Take
Marilyn.
care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Marilyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn.
You're welcome.